Welcome back to another episode of Mother's Milk Bank Fireside Chats. My name is Leche League. I am on the donor relations team and also the outreach manager here at Mother's Milk Bank. And I have joining me today a legend in milk banking, Lorraine Lockhart-Borman. Rather than going through a lot, Lorraine, let me just have you introduce yourself.
Okay, again, my name is Lorraine Lockhart-Borman. I was a former IBCLC and former director of Mother's Milk Bank, former director of outreach for Mother's Milk Bank.
Thank you. So let's start with that. You were at Mother's Milk Bank for over 35 years, I think, if we add up all of the time that you spent here. So 35 years ago, milk banking was not nearly as widespread and common as it is today. It's still a fairly small industry, of course. But tell me how you found yourself at the milk bank as an IBCLC in the community. How did you find the milk bank and get started here?
Well, let's go back even further than that because that gives a background for it. Milk banking actually started in the United States around the turn of the century, the last century. And at that time, there was just one milk bank in Boston, and there was milk banking also in Scandinavia and in Great Britain. But once a milk bank started in Boston, other cities opened them too. However, many of them closed throughout the years. In the 1950s, milk banking was pretty much no more. And that's because breastfeeding was no more. Without breastfeeding, there is no milk banking. They are intricately connected in essential ways. But in the 1960s, breastfeeding came back in all over the country, all over the world, and new milk banks started, okay? But there were very few, and they were widespread in a lot of ways. And so when our milk bank opened, when we had our first donor and our first recipient in May of 1984, breastfeeding was a good part of the culture of moms and babies. We started because there was a mom here in Denver who had a preterm infant. She delivered at Rose Medical Center, and she had trouble with her milk supply. And she had heard about milk banking, knew there was such a thing, but we didn't have one in Denver. She was connected with the Junior League, which is a lovely organization that does many special things, especially for women. She decided, by golly, I'm going to start one. And her name is Joyce Ann Burgett. She's a lovely person. Her son Ben, the preterm infant, is alive and well today. Because of Junior League, there was this money available. Money is essential to milk banking and having the funding and the resources available. So in 1984, I had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old, and I was a Leche League leader. Leche League is also a wonderful organization that supports breastfeeding. And a call went out for volunteers because there was one paid employee at that time, Sandy Erickson, RN. She is and was a wonderful friend of mine. And so I was like, well, I can do that, I could volunteer. I can't be a donor. My baby is over 2 years old now. There's no way I'm going to have extra milk. So how can I help this organization? So it came out of a need to help in some way. So I volunteered for over a year, and then there was a paid position that opened up as Sandy's assistant, and I applied for that and got it. About a year or two later, Sandy decided to retire and move on to other things in her life, and so I was available. My kids were starting to get older, going back to school. I had the time available. And even though I wasn't an RN, I wasn't a medical person, they let me have the job. So I became the director at that time.
That's wonderful. That's amazing. And I love hearing the story of how it all started just with one person who saw the need and wanted something better for her own baby, and then came together as a community. And you really described the way too that it takes, it's not just about the donors. The donors are of course integral to what we are doing, but it takes so many other things as well to keep those things moving and to have all of the other things in place, because the donors are dealing with a young baby. That's the definition of having a milk donor, is that they have a lot going on in their life and they can't do all of those other kind of administrative things. So that was amazing. You talked about the people in our community, in the Denver and the Colorado community that came together to make it happen as a milk bank here. How did it work out that you found, because in 1985 is when HMBANA, the Human Milk Banking Association of North America, that's when that organization started, is that correct?
Yes.
So tell me how those people in the milk bank here in Colorado connected with the other people across the country. And how did you decide that you needed to create this organization that has developed the standards of care and all of the consistency across milk banks in North America?
The Human Milk Banking Association of North America started again because of the Leche League, frankly. The Leche League is an international organization. They have a strong presence in the United States, and through years have kept a written list of milk banks. And I use that term loosely because back in those days, milk banks were different than they are now in many different ways. The thing that kept them called banks was because they accepted milk from people, from mothers, and they distributed it into the community, but that's where the differences end. Anyway, so they had this wonderful list, and so we started there. As our milk bank was starting, we referred to that list, and Sandy and I flew to San Jose, California, which is the closest milk bank to us, and visited there and watched their operations. They've been in operation for 10 years longer than we have.
That's the fact that we are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, yes. And the California Milk Bank in San Jose is celebrating their 50th, so yes. They're our big sister.
We're right on track with them. Anyway, they taught us a lot. And so we learned the process of how they screen their donors, how they pasteurize their milk, testing that they did, and all of those kinds of things. So this list, after we had this person-to-person contact with the folks in San Jose, we talked about, shouldn't we all be like on the same page and learning from one another like we just did? And so we wrote that was the only way to contact people in those days, either telephone or writing to people in a letter, and ask them to join us next year in Denver for a meeting. In the meantime, there were conferences going on, the Leche League and other breastfeeding conferences, and some of the people started to connect in little ways and get to know each other a little bit. But we had this first real meeting, and we invited speakers even from the local area, physicians, infectious disease person was there, a blood banking person was there, and so again, we had all this time to network and talk about what our differences and similarities were, and brought us together in the same room, which was the catalyst to say, yes, we need to have a formal organization.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And to think of those people who are, many of those milk banks that are still active today and helping babies, and all of the things that came together that we just kind of think of as our standards now. We're patterned after blood banking, but that group of people who who was having that conversation with the infectious disease person and the blood banking person to say, these are the kind of things that you need to think about and be concerned about, especially when this milk is going to the most fragile infants.
The interesting thing about starting our milk bank in 1984 was how it landed in history in terms of the HIV epidemic. So as a new milk bank, we knew that we were going to be testing our donors for HIV from the very beginning, that was an important super thing to do. Hepatitis B was also a standard already at that time, and cytomegalovirus was a standard, which is another whole issue. But anyway, so we needed the resources to do that testing, and by setting those standards, we also convinced other milk banks, the new members of the Human Milk Banking Association of North America, to also adopt those standards. And I feel proud of our milk bank because we were the standard setters in a lot of ways, in important ways that ensured the outcome.
Right, absolutely.
Of milk banking in the United States.
And you talked about learning from the folks in San Jose about pasteurizing, because that's another piece that's extremely important with all of those safety measures for cytomegalovirus and infectious viruses, and even just things, colds and flu and those kind of things that come along. That pasteurization process, which is the standard among Havana milk banks, is also an extremely important piece of the safety measures that we take.
Yes, and I'm just so proud that our bank has continued to evolve and take on all of the issues that have come down the pike throughout the history of different diseases. I mean, we have Mpox now, and whatever's going on, we're addressing it. And
right, we have committees and people who are like on the watching all of those things as they come through the news and assessing whether it is something that's a threat to a milk bank or if it's something that we need to begin monitoring for. How do the safety processes that we have in place, do they protect us against these new threats, and always making sure that we're on there. Do you have a story of a memory that you have of the milk bank, that of something that I'm putting you on the spot with that one of the stories. So
gosh,
a story
so
of something that that came up with those kind of things, or a story of a family that you helped, or what's something else that you're really proud of that you helped to accomplish through keeping this milk bank going. And
probably the most important thing for me is that we charge a processing fee for the milk. It's always been our mission to give milk away. It's given with love and heart from the donor to a recipient baby, to a recipient family, and we just get to be the middlemen between that, tangible love that's passing from one to another, and keeping money out of the equation in ways that we can. We still have to keep our doors open. We've always had to just have enough resources to be safe and to keep our doors open. But anytime we have milk and a baby gets milk, it's there for them. It's not about, can you afford it? Can you, do you have what it takes? It's being that service in the community that I'm most proud of.
And another piece of that is the other community organizations that we partner with on that. So what was it like getting hospitals on board with that? So now it's considered, since during the time that I've been in the lactation field, it is the standard of care for a baby in the NICU, if their mother's supply isn't sufficient, for that baby to be offered safe screened human donor milk. What was that process like, getting those hospitals on board to offer donor milk in their hospitals?
It was difficult in the early years because it was generally considered a new thing.
New is always hard.
New is hard.
Change is hard.
New is hard. The thing that changed how difficult it was research. And that's the other thing that I'm also proud of. When you talk about being proud, is that we tried to stay on top of the research. We tried to talk to researchers who were doing work on human milk. We would read researchers, invite researchers to participate with us when they could. But so in the early 90s, maybe 91, 92 especially, some real pivotal research came out that showed that human milk prevented necrotizing enterocolitis, which of course is the devastating illness that NICU babies sometimes get, where they get very sick in their intestines and often have surgery and often die. And so showing that human milk prevents NEC was huge. It was an excellent study, it was well done, and physicians and hospitals needed to pay attention to that. So that was big for us.
That is huge, and that is still one of our primary reasons that we want babies to get safe screened donor human milk today, is that those babies in the hospital that are at high risk for NEC, human milk is protective, whether it's their mother's milk or donor milk. It helps them to get off to a healthy start, and even babies who are lower risk, keeping them exclusively human milk, that is so important in those early days. Thank you for sharing all of those stories. That's wonderful. Yeah. What else do you have to add of, like, thinking of that next week we're at the 40th anniversary? How does that make you feel, knowing that this has been kept going for 40 years? It makes me sad that I don't get to work with you every day, and that you have. I'm happy for you that you've retired, but it makes me sad to not work with you every day. But what makes me proud is that this organization continues going. The people who founded it have been able to pass the torch to a new group of people, so that we can continue saving and celebrating a 40th anniversary, and looking forward to how we can keep this program going for many, many years into the future to help more families.
Yeah, what you said. I mean, it's really amazing. There were many times throughout, especially the early years, when I thought, this place could go down at any minute, because we didn't have the resources, but we always had support. And I guess that's what makes me feel really good about the future too, is because even when things were rough and we were barely making ends meet, there was always people who had our backs. There were organizations, the Mile High Transplant, Junior League. We applied for grants. We got some grants. There was always the Leche League. There was the Colorado Breastfeeding Coalition. We made friends out in the community, and they were rooting for us and giving us support in essential ways. So that made a huge difference. And I that's what it's how the milk bank has become part of the community, and people now know about us and rely on us, and I think we still have all that support, and even more in ways that we don't even know about.
Yeah, we do. I agree. I think we have so much support from our community, between hospitals and nonprofit organizations, and I think it has become, what's amazing to me again is to see just the generational support of how the foundation that was laid. We have for our anniversary celebration, we have a donor who responded to the celebration that her mother was a donor when she was a baby, and now she is a milk donor, and so we're having the donations just become generational, and the caring for other families and the support for other families, and just reinforcing all of those things, like you said, with the background and the connection with the Leche League, of how much community means to successful breast and chest feeding for families.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Lorraine. I love catching up with you and talking about all things milk banking.
Me too, Lena.
So it's always great to talk with you. I want to invite everyone in the local area to come to our 40th anniversary event. It is October 17th, which is a Thursday. It is from 4 to 7 p.m. here at the Milk Bank in Arvada. You can check our address online. We are at milkbankcolorado.org. A lot of the things that Lorraine and I talked about today, we have talked about in some of the previous Fireside Chats, so check those out too. They're all posted on our YouTube channel, and you can find links to those. And I hope you join us again next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Lorraine. Thank you.